On February 28, 2026, oil stopped flowing through the Strait of Hormuz. One waterway, 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, and within days, crude oil prices jumped 17%, surging past $110 a barrel. One waterway, and the entire global economy began to shake. But here's what most people don't realize. The Strait of Hormuz is not a new problem. We have been warned about this exact scenario for 50 years, ever since 1973, when Arab nations cut off oil and sent the Western world into a recession overnight. We knew this could happen, and we built the entire modern economy on top of it anyway. So the real question isn't what happens when the oil stops. The question is, why does the world keep putting itself in this position? And what does it actually cost when the bill finally comes due? Most people couldn't find the Strait of Hormuz on a map. They should be able to. It is a narrow passage of water, 21 miles across at its tightest point, connecting the Persian Gulf to the open ocean. Through those 21 miles, every single day, flows approximately 20 million barrels of oil. That is 20% of everything the entire world consumes. 1/4 of all the oil that moves by sea. Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE. These nations have almost no other way to get their oil to the world. They cannot build enough pipelines fast enough. They cannot reroute around it in time. The Strait of Hormuz is not a trade route. It is a choke point. And one country, Iran, sits on one side of it. When that country decides the waterway is a weapon, the math changes for every economy on Earth. We have been here before. October 1973, the Yom Kippur War. Arab nations, furious at American support for Israel, made a decision that would reshape the global economy forever. They cut the oil. OPEC announced an embargo. Supply to the United States and Western Europe stopped. The effect was immediate and devastating. Oil prices went from $3 a barrel to nearly $12 a barrel in months. That is a 300% increase in months. Fuel costs in the United States rose 40% in November 1973 alone. Queues at gas stations stretched for blocks. Rationing was introduced. But the deeper damage was structural. Industries that ran on cheap energy suddenly faced costs they could not absorb. Inflation surged. Growth collapsed. The developed world entered a period of stagflation, high inflation and economic stagnation at the same time. The most difficult economic condition to treat, because the tools that fix one make the other worse. The 1973 crisis ended, but it left a permanent mark. It proved that modern economies were not just dependent on oil, they were fragile because of that dependence. And the world drew a lesson, or was supposed to. Here is how an oil shock actually travels through an economy. It starts with the price of a barrel of crude. That price rises, fast. Within days, it reaches the petrol station. Fuel becomes more expensive. Truckers pay more to deliver goods. Airlines pay more to fly passengers. Farmers pay more to run machinery. Every cost that touches energy rises, and energy touches everything. The food on your table was grown with fertilizer made from natural gas. It was harvested by machines running on diesel. It was transported on trucks burning fuel. It was refrigerated in a warehouse powered by electricity. When oil prices spike, food prices follow. Not immediately, but inevitably. Fertilizer prices surged 30 to 40% within a single month of the 2026 Hormuz disruption. That shock will reach grocery shelves long after the immediate crisis passes. And then comes the second wave. When inflation rises, central banks raise interest rates. When interest rates rise, mortgages become more expensive. Business loans become more expensive. Debt becomes more expensive. The oil shock becomes a credit shock. The credit shock becomes a growth shock. And the growth shock becomes a recession. The United States, which has dramatically expanded its own domestic oil production over the past decade, has some insulation. American oil fields still pump. American refineries still run. But American consumers still pay global prices at the pump. And American exports still move on ships that need fuel that costs more. The real victims of a Hormuz disruption are the economies with no alternatives. China receives nearly 38% of all crude oil that transits the strait. India receives almost 15%. Japan and South Korea together, another 23%. These are the engines of Asian manufacturing. These are the factories that make the world's goods. If their energy supply is constrained, production slows. Goods become scarcer. Prices rise globally. And the countries least equipped to absorb those prices, the developing economies, the import-dependent nations, bear the heaviest burden. A disruption in a 21-mile waterway does not stay in that waterway. It travels to every grocery store, every factory floor, every family budget on Earth. 50 years separate 1973 from today. In that time, the world has built strategic petroleum reserves, more diversified energy sources, renewable energy industries, and more efficient cars and buildings. Progress, real progress. But also 50 years more of dependence. The global economy is larger now. It consumes more energy, not less. The supply chains are longer, not shorter. The interconnections are deeper, not shallower. When oil was $3 a barrel in 1973, a tripling of that price was devastating. Today, the baseline is already far higher. Goldman Sachs, in its worst-case scenario for the 2026 crisis, projected oil prices reaching $150 a barrel, with recession probability rising to 25% in the United States and significantly higher in Europe. The World Bank warned that inflation in developing economies could rise to 5.8%, a level exceeded only once in the past decade. The mechanisms of an oil shock have not changed. The scale of the damage has. Here is the uncomfortable truth at the center of this story. The vulnerability of the global economy to oil shocks is not a secret. It is not a surprise. It has been documented, analyzed, and warned about for 5 decades. After 1973, governments promised energy independence. After the 1979 Iran crisis, they promised it again. After the Gulf War, after September 11th, after every spike and every scare. And yet, as of today, 20% of global oil consumption still flows through a 21-mile passage that one hostile government can threaten to close. The reasons are not mysterious. Oil is cheap when it flows. The infrastructure is already built. The economics of switching are painful in the short term, even when the logic of switching is obvious in the long term. And so politicians choose the short term, always, until the short term runs out. The 1973 oil crisis lasted 5 months. The lines at the gas stations disappeared, the embargo ended, the price came down, and the world exhaled and went right back to what it was doing before. That is the pattern: shock, pain, recovery, amnesia. The lesson of 1973 was not that oil shocks are temporary. The lesson was that the conditions for the next one are built during the recovery from the last one. Every year of cheap flowing oil is a year in which the dependency deepens, in which the supply chains extend further, in which the alternatives get delayed one more budget cycle. The Strait of Hormuz will not always be closed, but it will always be there, 21 miles wide, carrying a fifth of the world's oil through a passage that any serious conflict can threaten. The global economy has known this for 50 years. It has chosen again and again to look away. The next oil shock will not announce itself in advance. It never does. It will simply arrive, and the world will discover, once again, exactly how much it never learned from the last time.